It's a special blessing for us to be able to have in our present and be hosting today Father Maximos. Father Maximos is a scholar, a patristic scholar, and an Athonite monk. He's the visiting professor at Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology in Brookline, Massachusetts. And he's an accomplished author who's here today to talk to us about the life and the work of our Father among the Saints, Maximos the Confessor. Father Maximos, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Would you tell us who is Saint Maximos the Confessor?
Maximus the Confessor is an important father of the church, an important church father. He lived in the 7th century, sort of at a time when the kind of golden age of Justinian was starting to fall into a decline. That's basically when he lived. He traveled about in the Mediterranean. I mean, he's known to have spent time in Constantinople, Asia Minor, North Africa, spent quite a bit of time in Rome. And he became deeply involved in the kind of later Christological controversy when people were debating not simply the natures of Christ, divine and human, but also the wills of Christ, whether or not Christ had a fully human will in addition to his divine will. So Maximus became caught up in that controversy and paid quite dearly for it, because insofar as he opposed the monothelite, the heretical monothelite views of the emperor, he was arrested, tortured by having his right hand cut off, since this was the hand that had dared to write against the emperor. And he also had his tongue torn out, because this was the instrument that had spoken out against the emperor. All of this, by the way, at the age of 82 or 83. I mean, he was an old man. And then sent off into exile, where he died on the far coast of the Black Sea. But his memory lived on, and his work lived on, and his theology was vindicated some years after his death at the Sixth Ecumenical Council. And he became one of the greatest sort of spiritual writers of the Orthodox tradition, so much so that the famous work, the Philokalia, gives St. Maximus the Confessor pride of place, which is to say that no other author occupies as much space in the Philokalia as St. Maximus does.
Why is that, Father? How did St. Maximus come to prominence? Why was he singled out by the heretical emperor for persecution?
Well, because Maximus very forcefully and very vehemently opposed the views of the emperor, making Maximus's views not simply theologically or problematic to the emperor, but because they were in opposition to the emperor, they were also treason.
But he wasn't a patriarch, he wasn't a great civil ruler. Why was this simple man's opinion so important that they would suppress him like this?
That's a good question, and it's hard to know the answer, but certainly part of the answer must have to do with the fact that he was just an utterly remarkable individual. We don't have sort of detailed personal descriptions about his character or his personality, but for him to have galvanized a whole tradition against the imperial government and against the patriarch at the time, who was also in league with the emperor, indicates that he must have been a very persuasive person, a very charismatic individual, and someone who spoke the truth, which was recognized by lovers of the truth.
You mentioned, Father, that he has such a pride of place in the Philokalia, which was put together many centuries after his death. Has he always been, since the time of his repose, cherished as a theologian in the church?
I think he was, even though there were periods of where there was greater or lesser interest in St. Maximus. So in the Middle Byzantine period, I'm thinking of sort of the 11th and 12th centuries in particular, where there was a revival of theological learning and philosophical studies in the Byzantine Empire. I mean, Maximus was at the fore of that renewed interest in certain kinds of theology, and certainly in a kind of a philosophically oriented theology. Later on in the late Byzantine period, in the hesychastic controversies. I mean, again, Maximus was at the center of, and sort of conflicting or differing interpretations of St. Maximus were very close to the center of that debate. So he's always sort of been there as part of the tradition. And the reason he's in the Philokalia, I mean, there are a number of reasons for that. I mean, St. Nicodemus, who was one of the compilers and the editors of the Philokalia, had a deep love for St. Maximus the Confessor, quotes him in all of his works, and was deeply devoted to his theology. So that's one reason, I think, why Maximus gets such a large place in the Philokalia. But beyond that, I mean, Maximus was directly involved in the transformation of the Orthodox spiritual tradition, which had been influenced in different ways by much earlier writers like Origen, and especially Evagrius, who on the one hand made tremendous contributions to the spiritual tradition of the Church, but at the same time, those contributions had certain flaws or problems or certain aspects that were ill-conceived or incorrectly conceived. And Maximus is the one who actually corrects all of that and manages to salvage all that's good and beautiful in Origen and Evagrius, while sort of purifying that earlier tradition in a sense from the dross or the chaff that it had. So he came to sort of set his seal on the whole tradition and allowed it all to kind of move forward.
Father, you're very well known as a patristic scholar, specifically with great competence in the teaching of St. Maximos the Confessor. And I'm holding in my hands the newly published, first ever complete English translation of St. Maximos Ambigua. This is volume 1, and if I'm correct, it's in 2 volumes now.
It's a 2-volume work, yeah.
2-volume work that just came out in a Bright Week, on Bright Tuesday, on difficulties in the Church Fathers, the Ambigua, volume 1 and 2, published by Harvard University Press. Father, what is this book? What is the Ambigua? And tell us a little bit about this translation and this edition.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out the answer to that question myself, but essentially the Ambigua is a series of chapters or essays of differing length, but a series of chapters or essays clarifying difficult or obscure or ambiguous passages in the writings of St. Gregory the Theologian. St. Gregory the Theologian was a 4th century writer who was, by the time of Maximus, was widely read throughout the Byzantine Empire, and had something like sort of unimpeachable sort of Orthodox credentials. So he was the theologian. He was read throughout Byzantine society, but because of Gregory's style of writing, some of his sayings, some of his pronouncements were difficult or obscure or ambiguous. And an associate of St. Maximus had sent him a collection of about 70 difficult or ambiguous passages from the writings of Gregory the Theologian, and had asked Maximus to clarify or explain them. Now, on the surface, that might not sound like much, but in fact, this gave Maximus the opportunity not simply to clarify obscure passages in Gregory's thought, but also to kind of unfurl or present his own sort of rather unique and profound theological and sort of philosophical worldview. So it's something of a tour de force, with varying layers of complexity, and it's probably safe to say, or fair to say, excuse me, that this is by far the most difficult work in the whole canon of Greek patristic literature. And by difficult, I mean both linguistically and also conceptually. So his language is extremely difficult, and once you've figured out the language, then you've got to struggle with the meaning of the concepts. So it's an extremely difficult work, and I'm sure most readers will find it challenging, to say the least.
How did you do it? Was it a tremendous personal struggle to make this translation, and how long did it take you?
Well, from start to finish, the whole thing took about 3 years, although the full-time work was essentially 2 years. It helped that he's my patron saint, and that I received his name at my monastic tonsure. So much of it was really an act of personal devotion. I mean, if I knew how difficult it was when I took the project on, I might have been dissuaded. I didn't know what I was getting myself into because I set out simply to translate the Greek text, but I quickly realized that the Greek text that we had was published a very long time ago is actually rather wobbly. I mean, it's not the text is not in good shape. I mean, the printed Greek text that we have has various errors and typos and omissions, and it's in very poor shape. So when I realized that, I also realized that I needed to actually look at some of the major manuscripts and collate them and establish the text on a better critical ground or footing, and that became the basis for the translation.
So you did the textual criticism work as well as the translation?
I did, yeah.
You did. Amazing. Thank you for doing it.
Thank God, and thanks St. Maximus.
Could I ask you, Father, if our listeners and those who are watching this video are interested in reading St. Maximus, and they've never read anything from St. Maximus before, where should they start if they're reading in English?
That's a good question. I think this is one of those cases where some sort of introductory essay would certainly be helpful. I mean, I'm all for people just sort of diving into the texts, and there are certain church fathers with whom one can do that for the most part. Chrysostom, Basil, they're relatively straightforward. Maximus is very complicated, partly because of his use of philosophical categories and so on. So I think most readers would be well advised to read a brief introduction, such as the essay by George Florovsky, or any of the others that are available. There are more than enough out there, and then maybe to start with a work like the chapters on love, which is a little more manageable. It also presents its difficulties and complexities, but it's not the kind of thing you can sit down and read 50 pages of at a time. I mean, it requires kind of a much slower assimilation.
Was this chapters on love, was it not written as in a century genre to be digested in small portions?
It is, yeah. People say that the Centuries on Love are Maximus's most popular and most beloved work, but that's also a very difficult work because what is it? It's essentially 400 aphorisms, 400 aphorisms dealing with different aspects of love and the virtues and the vices and the passions, and it's very difficult to assimilate 400 of anything, right? Let alone 400 sort of aphorisms about various aspects of the self and of life. So,
Father, in closing, would you share with us a little bit about your sponsor in this? How did you connect with the Harvard University Press? What's their interest in publishing St. Maximus?
Well, I mean, I taught at Harvard for many years, and I've had a long affiliation with Dumbarton Oaks, which is Harvard University's Center for Byzantine Studies in Washington, D.C., and I'm really excited by this publication because it's in a new series that Dumbarton Oaks has put out called the Dumbarton Oaks Medieval Library, and it contains volumes in Latin and Old English as well as volumes in Byzantine Greek, and it presents both the text and the translation in a facing page format. So this is the Dumbarton Oaks Medieval Library. They've got about 40 or so volumes now. More are to come. And the publisher is Harvard University Press. And one of the great things about publishing through a press like Harvard is that they're able to subsidize the volumes, which are costly to print. And the really good news is that these hardbound books that give both the Greek and the Greek text and an English translation are extremely affordable. Which is the very good news for people who.
And are they easily accessible on the internet?
You can order them directly from Harvard University Press's website, also through Amazon.
Excellent. Well, Father, it's a great contribution that you make. I know you're making it out of love for St. Maximus and for God, but on behalf of myself and my community, thank you. And for our watchers, thank you for making this investment in the providing the fathers and making them accessible to us in English.
Well, again, you're very welcome, but all the thanks and all the glory go to God.
Amen.